Imagine this. Every second, money is slipping through your fingers. $60 per minute, $3,600 per hour, gone. Feels painful, right? Now, what if I told you that time is more valuable than money? Because once it's gone, you can't get it back. The average lifespan in developed countries is about 80 years. That's 4,160 weeks. And if you're 30 years old, you've already spent 1,560 of them. If I asked you how much time you have left, you'd probably say, plenty. But that's just an illusion. Your brain is tricking you. Psychologists call this time perception bias, and there's science to prove it. In a 2005 study published in Applied Cognitive Psychology, researchers found that as we age, we perceive time as moving faster because each year becomes a smaller fraction of our total life experience. That's why summers felt endless as a kid. But now, boom, it's Christmas again. So while you think you have plenty of time, science proves otherwise. But don't worry, we're about to fix that. Let's visualize your life in a way you've probably never seen before. Here it is, your entire life in weeks. Each square on this grid represents 1 week of an average 80-year lifespan. Looks like a lot, right? But let's break it down. If you're 30 years old, you've already used up 1,560 of these squares. If you're 40, that's 2,080 squares gone. And if you're 50, well, more than half your squares have been spent. But here's the part that really hits hard. You don't actually get all of these squares. Let's take away the 1,000 squares spent sleeping. Let's remove the 2,500 squares used for work, commuting, and chores. What's left? Not much. And yet, most of us waste even these remaining squares on things that don't truly matter. But it's never too late to take control. The question is, how will you use your remaining squares? If you knew the exact date of your death, how would you live differently? Most people think of time as a straight line, stretching endlessly forward. But reality is different. Time is not a ruler, it's a countdown timer. And here's something that might shock you. By the time you turn 18, you've already spent 90% of the total time you'll ever have with your parents. If you're in your 30s, you've already experienced 80% of the time you'll spend with your closest friends. Most of your strongest friendships were built in school and early adulthood, and yet we act like we have unlimited time. We push dreams to someday. We think later is always an option. But here's the truth. Time doesn't work that way. Every week you spend, you never get back. You might think you're making the most of your time, but let's break it down. How do people actually spend their lives? The average person spends 23 years sleeping, 13 years working, 4 years eating, 7 years watching TV and scrolling social media, and only 1 year on things that truly make them happy. Think about it. You get only 1 single year of pure happiness across your entire life? Does that sound right to you? But here's the thing. This is not a draft. Life is happening right now, and there are no second chances. So how do we fix it? Good news! You have a choice. You decide how to fill your remaining weeks. So let's talk about 5 simple but powerful ways to make every week actually matter. 1. Stop waiting for Monday. People always say, I'll start next week. But let's be real. How many next Mondays have already passed? Let's do some real math. If you're 30 years old, you have about 2,600 Mondays left. If you're 40, you've got 2,080. And if you're 50, there are only 1,560 Mondays between you and 80. That's not as many as it sounds. So why wait for another one? 2. Choose experiences over things. Research shows that happiness from material possessions fades quickly, but experiences create long-lasting joy. Think about it. That new iPhone will be outdated in a year, but the feeling of standing on top of a mountain at sunrise? That lasts forever. 3. Appreciate the simple moments. Not every great memory comes from a big event. Sometimes it's a late-night conversation that made you laugh until you cried. or watching the stars in complete silence, or even just a hug from someone who truly cares about you. Life isn't just about the milestones. It's about the little moments in between. 4. Cut out toxic people. You have too few squares left to spend them on negativity. Surround yourself with those who actually make your life better. The truth is, we become like the people we spend the most time with. If your environment is draining you, you're wasting precious squares on stress and drama. 5. Do something you'd be proud to remember. Imagine this is your last week. What would you do differently? Would you finally write that book? Call that old friend? Take that one crazy trip you've always dreamed of? We always think we have time, but we don't. Every week is a square on your life's timeline. The question is, how will you fill the next one? Now, let's look at how some of history's greatest minds use their squares. Because here's the truth. It's not about how many weeks you have. It's about what you do with them. Here's Albert Einstein. At week number 1435, age 26, he published the theory of relativity and changed physics forever. And here's Steve Jobs. At week number 1062, he co-founded Apple, a company that would reshape the world of technology. But not all success happens young. Colonel Sanders, he started KFC at week number 3200, age 62. Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon at week number 1984, age 38. Nicholas Copernicus published his heliocentric model at age 70. George Washington became the first US president at 57. Look at these markers. Success, impact, and meaning don't follow a set timeline. These people prove that it's not the number of weeks that matter, but what you do with them. Your story is still being written. The question is, which week will be your turning point? Do you know who this is? No? What about these guys? That's right, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the legendary founders of Apple. But here's something most people don't know. There was a third founder. His name was Ronald Wayne. And in 1976, he owned 10% of Apple. If he had kept his shares, they would be worth over $200 billion today. But here's what happened. He got scared. He thought Apple was too risky. So after just 12 days, he sold his shares for $800. He went back to his normal life. He worked ordinary jobs. He watched Apple become one of the biggest companies in history, from the sidelines. Years later, he said he didn't regret his decision. But let's be honest, he spent his later years selling personal belongings and struggling financially. He made a choice that defined the rest of his life. Fear made him sell his future for less than the price of a used iPhone. Now, ask yourself, how many of your squares have been spent on fear? How many dreams have you postponed because it wasn't the right time? Here's the truth. There is no perfect time. You just have to start. Imagine this. You have one square left, just one. No more next Mondays. No more waiting. No more second chances. Here's the thing. Most people don't realize when they're spending their final square. No one wakes up knowing, this is my last Monday, or this is my last sunset. But the people who live like every square matters, they don't wait. They don't waste time. They make choices that count. Steve Jobs once said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart." So, what will you do with the squares you have left? You still have time, but not as much as you think. Make this week count, because one day, you'll wake up and realize, you just spent your last square. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.